Hello, everyone. Welcome to DataCon LA 2020. This is the Business Intelligence, Business Reporting and Use Cases track. Our session today is Finding the Problem to Solve Human-Centered AI with Raleigh Tomlinson. I'm Shannon Callan, your host. Our co-host is Azadeh Tehranian. She'll show up as AZ in the Q&A and chat. And we will be monitoring your Q&A and chat for you today. We'll save the last 10 minutes of this session for answering your questions and topics you'd like the speaker to elaborate on. Our speaker today is Raleigh Tomlinson. She'll be talking about UI design and specifically how designers can leverage AI intelligently. Raleigh consults with companies large and small in building apps and other data products for them. You can see her portfolio of work on her blog. It's posted here in the chat. And we're looking forward to Raleigh telling us about how designers can think about building innovative and human-centric products. Raleigh, over to you.
Hello, everybody. Hi, my name is Raleigh. I'm excited to share some thoughts with you today. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Oops, not that share. Oops, that's weird. First off, I wanted to say thank you for attending today. I don't have the luxury of seeing all of your beautiful faces, but I know it's a Sunday morning, so I'm really excited that you're here today. And any questions, feel free to email me if they come up in the chat and we don't get a chance to answer them. My website is raleigh.design and all my contact information and more about my previous work is there. So today we're going to be talking about finding the problem to solve. And really, I'm talking about a UX approach to developing AI. So as you probably know, AI is all around us. And I'm guessing if you're here today at DataCon, you know that. But I'm really going to talk about today how we can apply AI to human-centered problems. AI is very technical and very intimidating to a lot of people, but humans aren't. And we are each humans and we can understand humans. And if we build products for humans, they have a higher chance of adoption and a higher chance of being successful in the market. So what I really want to talk to you about today is a general introduction to UX and AI, UX questions to ask when developing AI products. And then I really want to talk about once you decide that it really is an AI solution that you need for your specific user problem, how does the user fit into that flow? Do we want to automate things for the user or do we want to augment the user? And then finally, I'm going to be touching on something called a reward function, which has to do with what happens when your AI fails. So starting with intro to UX. Oh, my mistake. So what is UX? Part one. We see this in all sorts of products, and it's the same with AI products as well. Without a real user problem, you're not going to have success in the market. You're taking a huge risk building something no one needs. No matter how awesome your data is and how awesome your processing is of that data, if you don't have a use case and a user need behind that, it's much more difficult to find those users once you turn to marketing. Involving your users throughout the process of design, it really allows you to create something big and something meaningful. And so I'm going to talk about the iterative design process in UX and how we do that with a number of products, but this also applies to AI. So a brief kind of crash course in design thinking. Design thinking is a methodology of getting as many ideas on the table in an unjudgmental way, and then testing those ideas as quickly and as rapidly as possible. So how that works is you spend some time discovering before you go into a solution mode. You talk to your users, you do research in the problem space, you spend time having an open table where there are no bad ideas. And then you start to define what exactly we're focusing on for this sprint. And you design and you deliver and test with users and iterate. And what this really does is it helps us focus on discovering opportunities for solutions instead of starting with some sort of idea of a solution. It also allows you to generate as many ideas as possible and test them equally. One thing is, as humans, we tend to be wishful thinkers, and we all want to think that we've thought of the best, greatest, next innovation ever. But it's different if something can be applied to one user than if something can be applied to a million users or a billion users. And so building in research and discovery into your phases helps you go beyond yourself and make sure that you're building something that is applicable to a larger market, and also get feedback from that market with your rapid prototype. So instead of spending 6 months to a year developing an MVP, you can go through the rapid minimal prototype possible in order to try and test your AI product or your design. I do week-long cycles, so I am testing every single week with users in order to try and shorten those feedback cycles as much as possible. So this is like kind of a little time lapse of me just drawing some extra thoughts on that. But discovery, it also has to do with identifying your assumptions, going out and testing them. And then what you do is you synthesize your findings before doing those before building your product, and then iterating on that. So thanks for going through with me on that. A little rough, but so now let's talk about some UX questions for AI products. Let's say you're sitting at a table and you're saying, you know what, I'm ready to innovate. I need to, I think I want to build an AI product. So what do you ask? And the first question is, what is the user need I am solving for? I'm going to use a case study to describe how to ask these questions. So this is an app that I think is a really elegant solution of merging user needs and AI. It's called Planta, and they are solving the problem of keeping plants alive. So how can we do that? So I know you might see in the background, I have one plant there. I've been, since quarantine especially, getting a bigger and bigger plant collection, and some of them have died. I'm sure I'm not the only person with this problem, but I just water them all the same. And these plants are from such diverse and different ecosystems from around the world. How can we leverage data to make that more doable? And I won't get ahead of myself. So let's talk about the user need, keeping plants alive. When you're thinking of building something, a lot of people start with, I have all this data, how can I turn it into an amazing AI? But what we should be asking is, given the scope of the user need that I've researched and verified, what data and structure matter to building an amazing AI? So I'm going to keep moving. The next question to ask is, does the problem, the user need that I've identified, require AI to solve it? And you might think, what? I started this with wanting to build AI, but at the end of the day, sometimes the problems are structural. Sometimes if you're looking at an existing product and you're trying to throw AI at it, there's actually information architecture problems that you can do first. So back to Planta, let's talk about some of their user needs. So each plant has different conditions that are best for it. I'm not a botanist. I studied biology and a little bit botany, but there's thousands of plants out there, and they all have their own needs that are distinct and different in so many ways. And I usually just water all my plants at once because it's a task. I'm like, oh, water plants. And some are really happy and others die. So what Planta has proposed as solutions for that, and these are potentially solutions that AI can help with, is, well, we can have a plant database. We can have plant identification because there's very defined guidelines as to how to identify plants based on their leaves. And then we can add a delight factor on top of that of care schedules that we know based on the plant database we have, and we can populate those to the user. So even though that seems really straightforward, I'm sure it took them a long time to find those exact feature sets that worked for their product. And despite what you, my mistake on the typo here, I saw that earlier. Despite what you hear, not everything needs AI to have value. Focusing on the problem means you allow yourself more flexibility to find out if AI is the solution organically. And switching to a chart just to kind of say a few things. There's an awesome there's an awesome team at Google, PAIR, which is a people plus AI team. And they have a ton of worksheets on how to ask yourself these questions when you're developing AI. And so these are a few, AI is probably better if the core experience requires recommending different content to different users, prediction events, and personalization in terms of like, they did this activity, so we can expect this activity. But AI is probably not better if the most valuable part of the experience is regardless of the data. Or the cost of errors is very high and outweighs the benefit of a small increase in data access and success. So practice with your problem. I think AI can solve this user need because, and try it with a few different versions. And again, there's a few worksheets to try this for your own problems, but I'm going to continue. So another question to ask is there a behavior pattern associated with this need? Yes, let's talk about Planta again, because it's a great way to go through these. So better watering habits that help people keep plants alive are supported by data, because this is a screenshot from Planta, and I had this mandevilla plant inside, and it said not recommended. This plant should be moved outside because it requires full sun, and they have watering care. It's a medium water plant, sun care, toxic for animals. And I immediately moved this plant to my balcony, and it is way happier. So every species has different ideal water patterns, light situations, but there is data for that. So also, we can complement this data with a water schedule that removes the complexity of keeping plants alive. This is a great example of automation and augmentation, which I'll talk about later, especially automation here. So another question to ask is, how will I define success? Can I define success? Now that you've identified this behavior, how are you going to refine your AI and check in with your AI and make sure that it's doing what you intend it to do? So in Planta, yes, but measuring success means you can evaluate and refine your AI. And I don't know exactly how they're measuring success because I'm just auditing Planta as an external person, but these are some ideas of what I think their success might be. Maybe it's an increase in users' plant health. They frequently have you, actually they automatically rank what they think your plant health is, and you can add pictures to track it over time. So maybe they say, oh, our plants are getting healthier. That's a success rate for us. Maybe success is that users are agreeing with the plant IDs that they recommend. And then a fail would be the opposite. So users are exiting out and searching for their own plant IDs. And maybe success is simply user interacting with the app and completing their watering cycles. What could failure mean? And just to kind of ask that question another way, what is not success? So failure might look like snoozing alerts. I'm not ready to water that, thinking the app is wrong. Maybe it's manual searching to override plants. Maybe it's actually seeing the plants die or their health decrease in various ways. This is a screenshot of the snooze. So you have the chance to water a plant or snooze it. And you could say failure is the user ignoring these messages. And then finally, I want to say, another question to ask is what type of AI is appropriate? And this brings me to my next part of the talk, which is augmentation versus automation. So augment. You want to augment places where it's important for the user to make a decision, where maybe it's high risk or high cost of failure. In Planta, they do it in a really interesting way. So because users have such diversity in the sizes of plants and the ages of plants, they augment the user's decision of how much water to add. So they tell you when to add water, but if you look here, they say, before you water, feel the soil. And this is if you scroll down a little bit, this is what you'll see. Snooze this action and we'll remind you again in 2 days. It's easier to kill a philodendron with overwatering than with underwatering. And it's definitely easier to save an underwatered philodendron than the opposite. So they're actually giving you information and they're augmenting your ability to make a decision about what to do in that case. This is an excellent human-centered use case for AI. And then the opposite, so to automate. Automation is really tasks that are admin, tasks that are very predictable, tasks that the user shouldn't have to make a decision on. I'm sure many of you have experienced products where they're like, why do I have to click this? Why do I have to manually schedule myself for all of these things? Instead of just clicking yes to all. We all use that on Google Calendar. That's amazing. It automates the task for the future. This is interesting because the identification of a plant is a great example of something to automate. They're not making the user go through the effort of looking at the stems, of telling, they're using computer imaging to say, you have mother's-in-law's tongue, which is, I thought it was called snake plant, but also, another thing that they're automating is the plant scheduling of the water, which I kind of talked about earlier. But they have that data and they're actually surfacing that data in a really interesting way, because instead of saying straightforward, this is, the water requirements for your plant, they're giving it to you in a format where it notifies you, this day I had 12 plants to water. So you guys can see I have quite the collection, but this was also the day I was setting up the app, so I had to water all of them. And I did another little drawing exercise, so I'm going to share that with you. So I wanted to talk about the use case of a patient-to-patient portal. So, hey, I need your help looking at this patient's EMR. Apologize for some of the lighting here. So I'm a patient, and patients often need to travel to multiple places in order to see a specialist and have multiple referrals. So the question is, how about we augment the doctor's human inputs at some points, but automate some of the main mundane tasks? And the way that AI fits into this cycle is the doctor is often giving diagnosis of physical characteristics about the patients, and the computer is giving back recommended specialists. This is a use case of AI that creates value. And when you have an infinite amount of data in an EMR, let me tell you, it's very useful to start with a human need, because it lets you narrow in a lot on exactly what kind of data specifications you want to filter for. And it allows you to create a structured data set that is really specific to the user needs that you're designing for. in this particular project, the docs were actually spending 85% of their time doing admin tasks or data input. What do you think? Do you think that that's a good use of human effort? The medical industry is one of the examples of where automation and augmentation could be really powerful to users, because we have people who need human to human contact and who are looking for doctors to have FaceTime with, but the doctors are caught up doing so much paperwork, so much admin tasks, and this platform was an example of it. It was the UI was all over the place. It had all of these different bars, and it was really hard to tell what was going on. And this was an example of actually me kind of coming in and say, AI isn't the solution here. This is a UX problem and a UI problem and an information architecture problem. But what is really powerful about the use case of automation and augmentation and AI here is you have the power to automate a lot of the tedious tasks that people don't like to do and give them more time for the creative tasks, for the decision-making tasks with AI and with data. Having a real human reply is a luxury. Don't waste their time on data input. And now to talk about augmentation and automation a little bit. So automation tasks, clear A/B tasks, yes or no tasks, formulas, things that have defined outcomes and defined success. Augmentation, this is a funny one, but eye contact, I wrote right there, direction, and I'll change the angle in a second. But with UI and UX and the considerations of augmentation to augmentation, you have a much higher chance of users adopting your AI tool. Okay, I guess it ends there. That's perfect. Oops, I pressed escape. Sorry. All right, let's go to the next slide. If it lets me. All right. So to just say that in a simpler format. So I'm 5 minutes left. I've got a little bit of time. So these are some of the things that automation is great for. I've kind of gone through this a little bit, but predictions, recommendations, personalization, natural language processing, recognition of classes, detection, predictable conversations, and augmentation, high impact tasks, directional decisions, ambiguous information, evaluation of that, things that not everyone agrees on right off the bat, creative tasks, any type of person-to-person contact. Eric Topol, who's like an amazing author, writes Deep Medicine, which is how artificial intelligence can make healthcare human again. We need to augment the person-to-person contact. And yeah, tasks that require transparency, high speed of getting to market. AI is a slow process because it takes a lot of time to get it right, and high risk tasks. And then finally, and then we were right on time, it looks like. So we're talking about reward function. What happens if our AI is wrong? Because it will fail. And that's part of it. So collaboration between your team, this is often in no means just a designer problem, but you need to define success and evaluate and monitor it. But also you need to take into context what will happen if it fails. So what is a positive, what is a negative, and what are the user implications of that? So, one example is, let's say that it's a COVID test and, you have a true positive, great. And I'm just kind of using COVID as an example to explain this chart. I know that's not an AI specific problem, but false negative, that's bad because you think you're negative and you go about possibly infecting people. False positive, that's okay, because then you're more cautious. Maybe it's not great because you don't want to think you have COVID when you don't, but you can get another test, or you can isolate. It's kind of no harm, no foul, and a true negative, again, good. But there are some situations where a false negative or a false positive have detrimental effects. And you want to be conscious of that and basically not only user test your platform, but you want to edge case test. So what is the worst thing that can happen? Is this, and when you're building these metrics, you can say, is this metric meaningful? How might this metric negatively impact some of our users? And, back to what does success mean on day one? What is it about day 1000? And this is a formula that Google uses to kind of say, what action will you take when things happen, and build that into your model. So, if users mark snooze in over 20% on day, then we will review this feature. We will get a notification on our data science and our design teams, and we're going to review this feature. And when you think about what could go wrong, there's the delight, there's amazing success. That's a possibility. And then there's, oh, I did what I expected. That's great, fine. No one liked it. That's bad, but it's not that bad. And then there's like someone died, or surgery went completely wrong, or a plane crashed into the ground. That's bad. So the key lessons that I kind of want to impart on you today is focus on a user need, not just the data that you already have access to. And you really need to decide if AI is necessary to solve the problem. Because at the end of the day, we're building human products for humans. And sometimes AI is the right solution, and sometimes it might not be. And automation is for tasks that might be ambiguous, are creative, or are giving directions. And automation is for predictable tasks, such as I discussed, but these are just a few examples: scheduling, admin, processing, or data reference. And I did not come up with all of these things on my own. I am really inspired by the People Plus AI Handbook, which is a resource that more than 100 Googlers have partaken, and it's open source, it's free, pair.withgoogle.com, and it's tons and tons of worksheets and information. This book that I just showed you, How Artificial Intelligence Can Make Healthcare Human Again, it's a really awesome read, very inspiring. Eric Topol has a couple books. This is the one that I have read. And then Microsoft, Stanford, and University of Washington also released their own guidelines, which you can just Google. It'll be the only result. So yeah, and with that, I'd like to open it up to questions. Thank you so much for listening and letting me share some UX plus AI information with you guys. Hey, Shannon. So how should this work? So are you monitoring the Q&A, or am I?
The way it works is you can just read out the questions and address them. You see them right there in the section Q&A, right?
All right. So it looks like we have no questions. So if anyone would like to add a question, I am encouraging you to do so now.
I guess I would say, can you tell us about any apps or products that have been inspirational to you, either because they were really good or were really awful, and you just said there's got to be a better way? So in your personal development, what has pushed you to develop the skills you have?
Yeah, two great questions. I'll start with the first. So one app just right off the top of my head that really inspires me is Google Flights, because that really changed the way that I saw the world, actually. And I am a fan of buying flights. So I was shocked at that you can like click explore on, put in your start airport, and then see red dots of all of the airports all over the world with price data. And you can scroll your dates of when you're planning on doing your flight back and forth to see projections of like low and high flights. And that really encouraged me to, a few years ago, like do really spontaneous trips because I was like, oh, what, $100 flight to Turkey? And, it's pretty amazing to be able to search through information at such scale in such an interactive interface. And then the second question about me and like some of the things I've worked on and what brought me here. I am in love with understanding people, and that has really driven my design process. And I originally, thought technology. I studied biology, and I thought that I had to be a very I didn't understand where creativity fit into in the technology realm, and it's actually very important. And especially with AI and you see augmentation and automation, we're at a place where we celebrate human creativity, and the questions of empathy are very important. When you have the tools to build anything, how do you decide to build the right thing?
Right. Great. We have another question here. You might see it says, do you have clients that were scared to lose their jobs with AI assistant? How did you deal with it?
Yeah, so I think that I haven't had a lot of people that are my personal clients that are scared of AI taking their jobs. But that question at large, I know, is on the forefront of a lot of AI conversations. And I can share a personal view, which is that I don't think jobs will go away. I think there will be a major shift in what skills are necessary. For example, we've had a lot of automation in our world for so long, but we're not seeing we're seeing declines in some industries, but we're also seeing new jobs emerge at large in other industries. So I think that it's a good question to ask yourself, if an AI can do the predictable tasks, what are the unpredictable tasks that I can create value doing?
Great. And then there's another question here. What is the biggest difference for you in the interface of AI products and a normal UI program?
Yeah, that's a great question. So AI in the prototyping is a lot different because you're trying to mimic an input and an output. So a lot of people will use something called like a Wizard of Oz technique, where you're the man behind the curtain and the user is doing one behavior and you're giving it back some piece of information. And so, UI is very visual, and UX for apps and for software it has to do with the journey of moving through the product and the space digitally. But when you're doing AI products, it has a lot to do with how is the user interacting and moving through a data experience.
Good. Another question here. How do you apply design thinking on an organizational level if you are not on the executive team?
Right. Yeah. So design thinking can be applied just in your own work. So I highly encourage you to try and take a design thinking approach to your everyday life. I know it sounds strange to think, how can I apply that? But it starts with being really open to your own ideas and kind of setting a time and place for ideation versus designing and versus testing. So I keep like a whiteboard around and a lot of the times I'm like working through all sorts of ideas, and it just feels good to erase them and draw another and erase it and draw another. And that process is very fundamental to design thinking.
Great. A couple other questions here. If false positive would cause really big effects, like maybe death and really high cost, do you think one should really consider to use AI, or would you implement it as a help for humans' decisions?
Good question. So I would say that, there are people that are working on very high risk AI problems. For example, you see a ton of AI emerging all around the medical space, but generally, no. I mean, if that's the risk, any type of very high risk false positives results, you do not want to be doing AI there. You want a human involved in that process. But there's people who are much bigger than myself who are able to juggle those pieces. I would say for the most part, no.
Yeah, right. Do you have an example of when the problem you were trying to solve for a client was a UX solution as opposed to an AI solution? Maybe you've talked a bit about this already,
Yeah.
but if you could say, how was the experience of explaining that to your client?
Yeah, so actually this client, they declined to do the UX work. So I said, look, all of our user tests are really bad. People are struggling to do basic tasks on this platform. And we could put AI into your platform, but also, if we spent 3 months just fixing all of the UX problems, that would probably really increase your NPS score with your users. And they said, no, we want AI. So then we just, in consulting work, you put a proposal forward and it's really up to the client whether they take it or not. So I think that we were still able to move forward with focusing in on one specific data solution, but I think it was a lot more in resources and a lot less effective than if they would have just fixed the structural UX problems to begin with.
Right. Okay. We just have 1 minute left here. The last question is about resources to learn more about measuring UX or experiment design. And you've shown us a couple of resources already. Maybe you can answer that one in the chat. And because we are out of time here, we need to wrap things up.
Okay.
So thank you very much, Raleigh, for your presentation. And thank you to all you attendees. We appreciate you being part of this session. Please contact Raleigh if you want to follow up on this really very interesting and timely topic. And please provide your comments and feedback to us organizers. And feel free to start a discussion on the topic in DataCon LA community. And we hope you all have a good rest of your day. Enjoy the rest of DataCon LA.
Thank you so much for attending. I really appreciate it. Have a good rest of your DataCon. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.